So far in logic and Max, we've looked at Max's built-in objects, so things like greater than or equal, less than equal, logical ands and logical ors and equals. But another way to do logic is to actually write your own conditional statement using an object called if. So if is a conditional statement that you actually get to write yourself. And this is in the form of if, then, or else, which essentially is what you're saying with these built-in objects, right? You say if input in the left operand is greater than the argument or the right operand, then output a 1. So I'm going to show you how to set up an if statement that completely matches the greater than object here. So we already know what this says, right? It says if input 1 is greater than our particular argument. So let's actually put an argument in here. Let's say if it's greater than 1. We don't need it to be a float. If it's greater than 1, output a 1. If it's less than 1, then output a 0. So I typed that into my if statement in a particular format, and you just have to remember what the format is, or you can go open up the help file and check out the operations here, the arguments that show you how to type it out. I have to look these up a lot, so if it takes you a while to memorize them, don't worry about it. Okay, so if input 1, the way that we call input 1 in this if statement is using the same $ symbol that we use for messages, except that we have to specify, is it an integer or a float? So we're going to do an integer if input number 1, which is an integer, and then we have a 1 after it, is greater than 1, then 1. All right, you see that our if object actually turned black instead of red or orange. It was there for a moment, showing me that it was not put together in the correct form. So now that it's black, I know that this is going to work at least somewhat, okay? So let's get an integer box up here, and we'll just use the same one. We'll use a toggle to display whether it works or not. And let's just see here. Right now we have a 0, which is less than 1, and I'm just tapping on my keyboard. I'm going to tap up to something greater than 1 and see what happens. Okay, so I got to greater than 1 and I put out a 1. I'm going to come back down though for a moment, and now when I put in a 1, notice that this greater than object actually has another condition attached to it, which is if it's greater than 1, output a 1. But if it's not greater than 1, else, then output a 0. So we need to add that statement into our if as well. And I just do that with the word else and then the number that I would like to output. Let's see if this works. All right, it appears to be working. So setting up an if statement to do exactly what a greater than object already does is not useful to you because it already exists. But what is useful to you is in your if statement, you have a lot more control over what you can specify. So you can have multiple inputs. For example, here you see a second integer and you call that $i number 2. And you can keep counting on up. So you can have multiple inputs. And then also you can put out anything that you want here. So see in this help file, we have if input number 1 is less than input number 2, then less, and it's going to actually output the word less, okay? And if it's not greater, then not less. So rather than having numbers defined here, right, 1 and 0, let's grab this, I can have symbols come out as well. Notice also it does do floating points. If you would like, remember instead of I, you have to have an F designating your inputs here. So I'd also like to show you some conditional options of if then. Notice that you have here multiple conditions setup. So this is where if gets really useful for you. This one says if input 1 is greater than 0 or input 1 is less than 0, then non-zero. And non-zero is the symbol that we're specifying here that is going to come out of if's default outlet. So anytime I have a 0, it's going to say 0. Anytime I have a non-zero, it's going to say non-zero. Notice this or statement here. It's the same way that we use to express or here as we did with this logical or object over here. So just one more thing about this, I'm going to show you how to set up this if statement here that's a little bit different. Let's say that I wanted to actually not end my input here. I want to continue my input through. I can do that. So instead of a 0 coming out, I'm going to change that to my actual input number. And so if I have a number that is greater than 1, then I'm just going to get 1. Everything else should come out as its original value. So 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, got it. And once I get below 1, now I'm actually getting all of those numbers. All right, and then lastly, I just want to show you that you can have multiple outlets of your if statement. So not only can you put multiple inlets here, multiple streams of data coming in that you want to check and have conditional statements applied to, you can also send data out of multiple outlets using this out to here. So here we have this these integer streams coming in, and it says if it's greater than 0, then output the input. So all of our positive values will go ahead and come out of here. And then it says else out to that input. So all of my negative values here will come out of my now right outlet. So you can see how if might simplify a number of tasks that you have been trying to do with logic, because you can combine many of your actions that you'd like to do into just one object. And you have very specific control over what inputs you take, what you do to them, and then what outputs you define.